Good morning, students. Hello, Abhiram. I hope I'm audible. Good morning. Good morning. Right. So we were talking about the 28 months of Congress rule. And we were talking about the achievements of the Congress within it. We were to cover this discussion under four spheres, that is the political activities, the work of agricultural relief, the work of upholding the promises made to the workers, and progress in the field of social reform. Out of these, we have already discussed the political activities, and we were to now talk about the agrarian practices, the agricultural reforms. Now, the agrarian program of the Congress was based upon the promises made during its election campaign. These included the promise of tenancy reforms, that is, providing security of tenure, negotiating a fixed rent that was affordable, increasing the length of the tenures. The second promise was that of land revenue reduction. The third promise was that of money lending regulation. Finally, the promise of rent control. Right? Now, the Congress, after coming to power, was slowly realizing that it was not in a position to abolish zamindari. So why the outright abolition of zamindari was not attempted? This becomes a major question. The Congress realized that it was not in a position to do so, firstly, because of its class adjustment strategy. That is, it wanted to fulfill the demands of the peasants to the extent that they did not alienate the zamindar class completely. They wanted the zamindars to support the Congress, keep supporting it against British rule, and as far as possible, prevent their migration from the Congress camp to the British camp. Secondly, the smaller zamindars in many areas were actually strong supporters of the Congress, so it did not want to alienate them, right? And thus, the Gandhian strategy of class cooperation had been given a more physical manifestation in the form of the class adjustment strategy. Another problem was that it would have required major changes to the colonial administrative setup, for which the provincial governments did not have sufficient power. Right? The Congress leadership also realized that if it was to take any major steps that were openly hostile to the British imperial interests in India, the Governor General, using his extraordinary powers, would block them. The Governor Generals enjoyed extraordinary power and would block any radical reforms. Further, in many of the Congress ruled states, there were they had a bicameral legislature in which the upper house represented a reactionary chamber, right? So it was a safeguard that had been put by the British in many of these states under the aegis of the Government of India Act 1935, which had introduced bicameralism at the provincial level in order to protect its core interests. Now, these, unlike the popularly elected provincial legislative councils, did not have popularly elected members. Rather, these councils were stuffed by the British with loyalist nominated members, and they would also have blocked any kind of radical reform agenda. Right? So the Congress had to walk a tightrope, balancing the interests of the conservative group as well as the more radical group. Right? So presence of reactionary second chambers in many provinces right? So this was another factor why zamindari abolition was not attempted. Moreover, there was not sufficient data, nor were there sufficient funds to carry out the task of zamindari abolition. Further, the Congress was also not confident of the cooperation of the bureaucracy, both the upper as well as lower bureaucracy, since many of these groups were involved in the practice of zamindari. They either owned land in the countryside or were acting as agents of big and small zamindars. So, no confidence in the cooperation of lower officials of bureaucrats. Further, the Congress realized that the task of zamindari abolition was going to be a very lengthy and time taking process. And the Congress knew from the very beginning that it was always going to be short of time. Now, the consensus within the Congress when the strategic debate had happened was that the purpose of office entry was not to cooperate with the constitutional machinery set up by the 1935 Act, but to oppose it from within. And the Congress knew that sooner or later, the provincial governors or the Governor General of India are going to use their extraordinary powers to dismiss the popularly elected Congress ministries. And thus, realizing that there was not sufficient time, the Congress decided to take more practical steps towards reform and addressing the core demands of the peasants. And in this scenario, the goal of abolition of zamindari had to be delayed, or progress towards abolition of zamindari had to be delayed, right? So that is why outright abolition of zamindari was not attempted by the Congress. But if the Congress did not attempt the abolition of zamindari, what did it actually do in order to address the demands of the peasants? So acts or steps taken by the Congress ministries to address peasant demands. This included in 1938 the enactment of various tenancy laws by the different provincial governments of the Congress ruled states. These gave occupancy rights to tenants. They worked to provide them security of tenure, and also gave the tenants legal protections against zamindars. In the field of rent control, rents were adjusted in UP, Bihar, and Bengal through various tenancy laws. In Madras, the government was on the verge of enacting a radical legislation outlawing the collection of rent from the tenants. But before it had the opportunity to do so, the Congress ministries resigned en masse due to the declaration of war by the Governor General on behalf of the whole of India. Was in the process of radical reform when the government resigned. In other areas such as NWFP and Assam, rent control acts were enacted to reduce the burden of rent liable to be paid by the tenants to the landlords. However, in Bombay, in the Bombay province, there was no substantial movement or no substantial reform. Right. Next, land revenue control. While the Congress ministries of various provinces tried to introduce legislations to reduce the burden of land revenue faced by the peasants, except for Bihar, where the land revenue was cut by 50%. Similar moves were unsuccessful in other provinces. Right. In other provinces, the move was blocked either by the upper houses, that is the state legislative councils, or the Governor General of India. Further, in the other Congress ministries except for Bihar, the Congress had also adopted the policy of entering into a compromise with the landed sections. So the compromise with zamindars also diluted the radical agenda of the Congress with regards to both land revenue control as well as rent control. In the area of regulation of money lending, the Congress had to face a dual alliance of money lenders and lawyers. And as a result, the progress on this issue was abortive in nature. Right? That means a start had been made, but no real movement on the ground was visible. What was the impact of these agrarian reforms? Firstly, the Congress expressed its commitment to the peasant cause. The peasants in most of India remained loyal to the Congress. The Congress was also able to enlist the support of the newly formed All India Kisan Sabha and the various provincial Kisan Sabhas. And prevent them from drifting towards the communists. However, some of the left-leaning leaders were disaffected, and as a result, their confidence in the Congress was shaken. A growing minority among the leftist leaders started feeling that the Congress was not actually concerned about the demands of the peasants, about the peasant cause, and they began to criticize the Congress for sympathizing with the zamindars and moneylenders. At the same time, a section of the zamindar or moneylender class was also alienated from the Congress, and this divide also overlapped with the communal divide within the zamindari and moneylender classes. Most Muslim zamindars and moneylenders gravitated towards the Muslim League and regional Muslim parties, who had protected their interests against the Congress, the left, and the peasants. These parties included the Krishak Praja Party, the Unionist Party, the Sindh United Party, etc. Right? So the agrarian classes began to divide themselves on the basis of peasant reforms, on the basis of agrarian reforms. Right? So this was the agricultural program of the Congress in the Congress ruled ministries in its 28 months of rule from 1937 to 1939. Quickly, let us jot this down. Give the subheading agrarian reforms or agrarian program. Write down. The Congress tried to provide economic relief to the peasants, as quickly as possible. It remained committed to its promises of tenancy reform, comma, reduction of land revenue and rent, comma, reducing the burden of debt, reducing the burden of debt, and regulating the money lending business, and regulating the money lending business. Subheading though, why the complete abolition of zamindari was not attempted? Why the complete abolition of zamindari was not attempted? Write down one by one, 1, 2, 3, 4 करके. Number 1, the Congress was pursuing a strategy of class adjustment, full stop. A multi-class movement required the balancing of mutually opposite class interests. Full stop. This was necessary to present a united front to British imperialism, comma, the main enemy of Indians, full stop. The Congress wanted to win over, or at least neutralize. The Congress wanted to win over or at least neutralize as large a part of the zamindar class as possible, and isolate the enemy, depriving it of all social support within India. Full stop. This was even more necessary since in many parts of the country small landlords actively supported the national movement. Right. Number 2, under the constitutional scheme established by the 1935 Act, comma, the provincial governments were not powerful enough to carry out the total abolition of zamindari. Number 4. Sorry, number 3. Write down. The Governor General, enjoyed extraordinary powers with respect to general administration. Full stop. Since zamindari abolition would have involved an overhaul of the administrative structure, comma, it would definitely have been blocked. Next लिखो. Number 4. In many of the Congress governed provinces, comma, bicameral legislatures had been set up under the Government of India Act 1935. Right. So these included UP, Bihar, Odisha, Madras, and Bombay. Right. That is UP, Bihar, Madras, Odisha, and Bombay. Full stop. The upper houses, within brackets you can write state legislative councils, SLCs. Upper houses or state legislative councils represented reactionary second chambers consisting of nominated members and loyalists elected on the basis of a very narrow franchise. Full stop. They were dominated by zamindars, money lenders, and capitalists. With the Congress forming a small minority. Full stop. they created hurdles in the path of any substantial reform which threatened their class interests. Next, number 5. Write down. The task of zamindari abolition would have required extraordinary funding. Stop. The provincial governments were not in the financial position to fund such an initiative. Full stop. Further, comma, the provincial governments did not have sufficient information on the crucial components of the agrarian structure, such as land rights, occupancy status, land use, etc. Full stop. Without this information, the abolition of zamindari was virtually impossible. Next, number 6. The Congress leadership also lacked confidence in the local bureaucracy, whose cooperation was considered essential for zamindari abolition. Full stop. This was because many of the government employees had vested interests in the continuation of zamindari. Full stop. Lastly, write down. The Congress ministries also were also constrained. For time. Full stop. The leadership knew that the ministries would not last long. Would not last long. Since the logic of their politics, was to challenge imperialism and not cooperate with it. Full stop. Therefore, the ministries had to act quickly. Therefore, the ministries had to act quickly and achieve as much as possible in the shortest time, as much as possible in the limited time available. Therefore, the Congress ministries had to act quickly and achieve as much as possible in the limited time available. Achieve as much as possible in the limited time available. Okay? So, these were the reasons why zamindari abolition was never attempted. Next subheading: acts or steps taken by the Congress ministries. Acts or steps taken by the Congress ministries. Write down. Tenancy laws were passed in UP, Bihar, and Odisha. Giving several rights to the tenants. And imposing restrictions on zamindars. Full stop. In Bombay, CP and NWFP also. In Bombay, CP and NWFP also. The peasants received occupancy rights, security of tenure, and legal protections. Full stop. Next point: rent control was attempted in many provinces with differing degrees of success. Full stop. The poorest performer was Bombay. While UP and Bihar were the most successful. Next point: reduction of land revenue, reduction of land revenue was also attempted in all Congress ruled provinces. In all Congress ruled provinces. Full stop. However, except Bihar, where it was reduced by half, except Bihar, where it was reduced by half, comma, it was blocked either by the state legislative councils, or the governor general, Next point. The regulation of money lending, ran into legal hurdles, as the Congress faced stiff opposition from a dual alliance of moneylenders and lawyers. As the Congress faced stiff opposition from a dual alliance of moneylenders and lawyers. Full stop. The legal profession defended the money lending business, and opposed its strict regulation, because debt litigation constituted a major source of their income, Full stop. Thus, progress remained abortive. However, in provinces such as Bihar, Odisha, CP, Madras, and NWFP, Debtors Relief Acts, provided some relief in the form of reducing the debt burden, comma, liberating bonded laborers, and abolishing the fees for use of community lands such as grazing pastures and village land. So stop. Next point. Next subheading. Impact of the Congress's agrarian program. Impact of the Congress's agrarian program. Number one, the Congress remained steadfastly committed to the peasant cause. Next subpoint. Most peasants across India remained loyal to the Congress. Next subpoint. The Congress also benefited from the newly emergent organized peasant movements such as the Kisan Sabhas. Next subpoint, number 4. However, some left-leaning Congress and peasant leaders were dissatisfied by the slow progress and drifted towards the communists. Next, write down number 5. Further, the peasant program also alienated zamindars and moneylenders who began supporting the loyalist cause. Further, most Muslim zamindars and moneylenders gravitated towards the Muslim League and regional Muslim parties who promised to shield them from the tyranny of the Congress, the communists, and the communal peasants. The Congress, the communists, and the communal peasants. Right? So this was the agrarian program. Next, workers program. Right. First of all, the promises made by the Congress towards the workers' movement included, first of all, the right of workers to form trade unions, secondly, working to fulfill the basic demands of the working classes, such as higher wages, better working conditions, better living conditions, encouraging the participation of workers in the management of their industries, fair and just mechanism of dispute resolution, and finally, ending the tyranny of the capitalist class. Right? However, the workers' agenda of the Congress faced a very strong contradiction from the very beginning. While the Congress had promised to alleviate the suffering of the workers, the interests of the workers were mutually conflicting against the capitalists, and the capitalists continued to play a very important role in the area of campaign funding. Right? So much of the campaign funding came from the capitalist class. And secondly, within the Congress, two ideological groups had clearly emerged. One was the right wing, characterized by leaders such as C. Rajgopalachari, K. M. Munshi, Sardar Patel, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, etc., and the left wing leaders led by Pandit Nehru and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, along with certain other leaders such as Yusuf Meherli, Achyut Rao Patwardhan, etc. Now, they were ideologically opposed to each other. They wanted to support a workers' movement in the among the masses in the society, so that structural reforms could be brought about. While the right-wing leaders were concerned about the rise of Bolshevism in India, which would result in the beginning of a major class struggle that may take the shape of a civil war and would threaten the unity and integrity of India and may deteriorate the working of the government to the point that these governments become untenable and the country may be fractured, it may balkanize. So therefore, they were not very tolerant of a radical movement within the Congress, right? And thus, the Congress also tried to apply the strategy of class adjustment to the workers program, right? Now, while several of the Congress ministries introduced legislations to enshrine the right of workers to form trade unions, it also brought in greater regulations for providing higher wages, better working conditions, and better living conditions to the workers. They also work to encourage participation of workers in management. They tried to initiate a trade disputes bill or introduce trade disputes bill to create a mechanism of trade disputes tribunals where disputes could be resolved peacefully without confrontation. They wanted that workers should resort to strikes only as the last resort, right? To as the last measure, while they wanted the industrialists to resort to lockouts only as the last measure. So before any strike or any lockout, compulsory arbitration became, let us say, paramount, right? So arbitration in these tribunals became paramount, became compulsory. And to end the tyranny of the capitalist class, they wanted to encourage the capitalist class to align themselves with the goals of the Congress. That means commitment towards Purna Swaraj, boycotting the British goods and British raw materials whenever the Congress called upon them to do so, and voluntarily looking after the demands of the workers, right? So that is what the Congress wanted. However, the left-wing leaders responded by criticizing the Congress's strategy. They were of the opinion that the Congress was trying to derail the organic movement that was emerging among the workers because it was looking to protect the interests of the capitalist class who were the main funders of the Congress movement. So they accused the Congress for lack of sincerity with regards to the workers program, right? And in the end, the result was the same as we had seen in the case of the peasant movement, right? So initially, the Congress tried to initiate certain measures in favor of the workers, but the capitalists became alarmed and openly began to support the loyalist elements. Therefore, in order to placate the industrialists, the capitalists, some of the most radical reforms suggested by the initial legislations, by the initial steps, they had to be diluted. Now, in the end, it resulted in the erosion of support from both camps. Both the industrialists as well as the workers were disenchanted. The industrialists drifted further away from the Congress. The workers also drifted towards the communists, right? So this is what actually happened. Let us quickly take this down, give the heading Workers Program. Write down. The Congress ministries in general adopted a pro-labor stance. Their approach included A, B, C, D करके. A, to promote workers' interests while upholding industrial peace. B, ensuring that strikes and lockouts become measures of the last resort. C, establishing a fair and just dispute resolution mechanism. D, advocating compulsory arbitration before any strike or lockout. E, creating goodwill between workers and capitalists, with the Congress emerging as the intermediary. Full stop. Next main point. The Congress took some steps to fulfill workers' demands, such as setting up an industrial disputes committee in Bombay and labor inquiry committees in UP and Bihar. Full stop. They recommended A, B, C, A, compulsory arbitration of industrial disputes. B, prohibition of strikes and lockouts. C, increasing workers' wages. D, providing for the recruitment of workers through independent labor boards. That means hiring and firing are not going to be the responsibility of the management of the industry any longer. Rather, a separate government board is going to decide which mill or which factory requires how many workers, what are the wages to be found, if there is downsizing, who should be removed, on what terms, etc. तो ये सब अब सरकार की responsibility होगी. तो recruitment through independent labor boards. E. Maternity benefits to women workers. And F. Strengthening of trade union rights. Next point or next subheading, contradiction. However, from the very beginning, the Congress's worker program ran into major contradictions. Number one, the capitalists had provided much of the campaign funding to the Congress during the 1937 elections. Thus, a radical workers program was not possible. And two, there was a growing rift between the right and left wings within the Congress. So stop. Right wing leaders felt threatened by the emergence of Bolshevism, and did not want a bloody revolution that would derail the national movement, disrupt administration, deteriorate law and order, and destroy nationalism or destroy national unity. Full stop. On the other hand, the left-wing leaders questioned the Congress's sincerity towards the workers' agenda. Towards the workers' agenda. Full stop. For example, the various trade bills, were designed to support trade unions, created by the capitalists, rather than the workers. Okay? So these two important contradictions emerged. Next main point likho. As a result, comma, while the conservatives slowed down the agenda of the workers' movement, they were unable to restore the trust of the capitalist class. Full stop. On the other hand, the workers felt increasingly agitated and drifted further towards the left. Full stop. The Congress policy of class cooperation and strategy of class adjustment received a major setback due to the division of the class groups into pro and anti-Congress factions. Okay? So these were the developments with regards to the workers' rights. And finally, last program, the social program. Social reforms of the Congress ministries. Right. Now, the first issue that the Congress ministries tackled was that of prohibition. Right? That means prohibition of liquor and other intoxicants. Now, the Congress, or especially Mahatma Gandhi, had wanted the Congress to introduce prohibition universally. That means in all the Congress governed provinces. But this was not possible. Right? So it was implemented in select areas. Write down. Prohibition was implemented in selected areas of different states of different states. Full stop. The Gandhian objective of total prohibition was not attempted. Why? Because A, there was lack of popular support in several areas, and B, because doing so would have been counterproductive to the Congress ministries themselves, because excise duty on liquor was a major source of provincial revenue. Right? So it was not attempted. The Gandhian objective of total prohibition was not attempted because A and B. Because A, there was lack of popular support. And B, excise duty on liquor constituted a major source of provincial revenue. The second objective of the Congress was to bring about reforms in order to emancipate the untouchables. Write down. In the sphere of emancipating and empowering untouchables or Harijans, the following steps were taken. A, B, C, D करके लिखो. A, laws were passed allowing Harijans to enter temples freely. B, access to public spaces such as roads, parks, theaters, schools, restaurants, hotels, water wells, etc. Was given legally. See, no government authority or functionary would recognize any usage or custom which imposed any civil disability on Harijans. D. Number of scholarships to Harijan students was increased. And finally, E. Recruitment of Harijans in police and government services was encouraged. Okay. So first we have seen the prohibition policy, second the Harijan policy, third the Congress also paid attention to primary, secondary and higher education along with public health and sanitation. Subpoint. Special emphasis was given to the education of Harijans and girls, Next subpoint. Mass literacy campaigns for adults were organized. Next subpoint. Basic education with an emphasis on manual and productive work. Basic education with an emphasis on manual and productive work was expanded. Totally. Khadi and Charkha programs were also supported by the government through subsidies. Write down. Subsidy support were provided to Khadi enterprises and village industries. Khadi enterprises and village industries. Next, 5. Prison reforms. Prison reforms were carried out. Involving better conditions of incarceration, abolition of solitary confinement, introduction of educational and rehabilitative programs, release of under trials, and legal access to imprisoned inmates. Legal access to imprisoned inmates, right? So these were the tasks done by the Congress in the field of its social program. Okay? And finally, we look at the critical evaluation of 28 months of Congress rule. Critical evaluation of 28 months of Congress rule. Acha. In the context of agrarian reforms, did the British not keep any records for the Congress ministries to use, like land records, etc.? If they did not have such records, how were they able to govern before? Now look, problem with the agrarian structure was that it did not extend, or the record keeping did not extend or exist to the lowest level, to the producer class. In the zamindari areas, for example, the British only recognized a single zamindar as the owner of a large estate. The zamindar was free to divide his zamindari into as many subtenancy tenures as he wished. These subtenants were further free to divide their own tenancies into subtenancies, and they were also free to divide their tenancies into further subtenancies, right? While the British administration was interested only in maintaining its direct link with the zamindar, these zamindars were responsible for maintaining the records with respect to the lower level functionaries, the subtenants and the producers. Okay? And since the task of zamindari abolition would have involved the supply of information from the zamindar to the provincial governments, this would not have been possible, because in that case the zamindar would have been cooperating with the government in the abolition of his own rights, of his own interests, right, in the destruction of his own interests. Similar was the case in the other areas, the Rayatwari as well as the Mahalwari areas, where the land market had become extremely mobile, where the problem of rural indebtedness had become entrenched. And many of the original peasant cultivators had become landless laborers. They had become tenants on the lands that they used to cultivate. Much of the land was once again in the hands of a small, rich landowning class. So, although formally zamindari system did not exist in those areas, an informal version of the zamindari system did exist in the Rayatwari areas also and the Mahalwari areas also. And once again, the same practical hurdles would be there. ठीक है अभिराम? All right. हाँ. So, critical evaluation of the 28 months of Congress rule. So, would it be correct to say that the 28 months of Congress rule were without any success? नहीं होगा, right? Some major achievements were encountered. The Congress was able to fulfill much of its program, even though some parts of the leftist groups or some leaders among the leftist leaders were disaffected by the Congress. In large measure, their demands had been fulfilled. The Congress was also able to prevent the outbreak of communal violence in any large measure. And in this, the contrast between the Congress ruled states and the non-Congress ruled states was very clear. In Bengal, from 1937 to 1938, a series of communal clashes took place while the government sat on its hands doing nothing in order to stop the cycle of violence. In the Congress governed states, the government stepped in to actively prevent the expansion of violence. Right? Thirdly, the Congress was also able to provide a glimpse of Swaraj to the masses. It was able to show them what kind of reforms were possible if Indians were given the right to rule. It was able to show the masses that the Congress ministries with relatively limited powers had been able to bring about social transformation and to work for the upliftment of the downtrodden in such a powerful manner. What would be the scenario if the country was governed fully by the Congress and its leaders or fully by Indians, right? It was also able to shatter the strongest myth on the basis of which the British had been perpetuating their rule in India, that Indians were unfit for rule. The Congress ministries were very efficient. They were also able to create consensus in the highly divided political atmosphere that existed in the country during the late 1930s. Now, one of the major factors for the one of the major objectives of the Government of India Act 1935 was to create a growing sense of provincialism in India in order to weaken nationalism. That the different Congress ministries or the different provincial governments would adopt independent policies and no national policy would be able to emerge in order to address the challenge posed by British rule. However, the Congress in the very beginning itself decided to coordinate the activities of all its ministries. At Delhi, a central Congress command party was established and the provincial governments by and large stood by and accepted the directives of this central Congress command party, right? However, despite all these achievements, some notable weaknesses were also visible. Kya? First of all, many of the Congress leaders, especially the right-leaning leaders, resorted to the old colonial practices of using the police and military in order to suppress their political opponents, right? So this diluted the reformative agenda of the national movement of the Congress's rule, And it also created a sense of alienation between the political opposition and the government leaders, right? This was especially the case in provinces such as Bombay and Madras. In Bombay, the Home Minister under BG Kher, that is KM Munshi, he used the police in order to target the opponents. In Madras, C. Rajgopalachary's government also used the secret police in order to suppress the activity of the political opposition, especially the leftists. So we have already discussed this, right? Secondly, because of the contradictions within the national movement, the Congress found it almost impossible to satisfy all the parties involved, right? And in the end, what happened was that while the Congress was able to gain new followers, some of its old followers left them, and they began to strike their own independent path, right? And this would weaken the Congress movement in the future. Thirdly, the Congress, while it was able to prove that Indians were fit for rule, for the first time it came face to face with the practical limitations of governance, right? And in this, the Congress was found wanting, at least to a certain degree. Neither was it in a position to pursue a radical agenda of social, political, and economic transformation, nor did it have the will to pursue such an agenda, right? So there were internal divisions within the Congress that had become apparent, right? And thus, while the Congress ministries on the whole registered success, some limitations were definitely visible. Okay? So this is the critical evaluation of the 28 months of Congress rule. Write down. On the whole, comma, the legislative and administrative record, of the Congress ministries was positive. Full stop. Even though the left was critical, many of its expectations had been fulfilled to a large extent. Next point. A major achievement of the Congress ministries, was their firm handling of communal riots. Full stop. This was remarkable given the heavily charged atmosphere of communal politics prevalent during the late 1930s. Due to the divisive agenda the divisive agenda being pursued by the Muslim League, being pursued by the Muslim League. Full stop. Next main point. The Congress leadership also demonstrated its ability to resist the imperialist design of using constitutional reforms to weaken nationalism. Full stop. Instead, they demonstrated how constitutional power could be used to further national aims without being co-opted. Right? And इसका direct manifestation क्या था? That instead of nationalism weakening at the end of these 28 months, the national consciousness was far stronger. Write down. As a result, national consciousness was far stronger at the end of Congress rule than it had been in 1937. ठीक है? Next main point. Another important outcome of 28 months of Congress rule was the demoralization of the bureaucracy. Full stop. British civil servants could no longer block the reform agenda of popularly elected Indian ministers. Could no longer block the reform agenda of popularly elected Indian ministers. Full stop. Many came to believe that the end of British rule was simply a matter of time now. was simply a matter of time now. Next main point. Congress rule also gave the people a glimpse of Swaraj. Full stop. It showed what could be achieved by committed leadership enjoying relatively little power. Full stop. Thus, it raised the hopes of the masses towards the prospect of Purn Swaraj. Full stop. Subpoint. As a result, the masses were ready to sacrifice even more to the cause of complete independence. Full stop. This is reflected in the extent of mass participation during the Quit India movement. Next main point. The Congress was also able to prevent provincialism, which had been one of the major objectives of the 1935 Act. Full stop. The British expected that Indian unity would be weakened by the independent policy of the different provincial governments. Full stop. Subpoint. However, Congress ruled ministries strictly adhered to the Central Congress Committee's directives. Throughout the 28 months. Full stop. Thus, nationalism was strengthened. Nationalism was strengthened instead of becoming weaker. Instead of becoming weaker. Full stop. Next point. By balancing the contradictory and mutually exclusive, by balancing the contradictory and mutually exclusive interests of the right and the left, comma, the Congress was able to prevent a major split from taking place. Full stop. This was something that the British were desperately trying to engineer since 1934, right, in the context of the post CDM strategic debate, right. So we have looked at the positive aspects of 28 months of Congress rule, negative aspects after a short break. Give me a couple of minutes, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. If I'm still audible, please let me know. All right, thank you. Now, so positive aspects of the 28 months of Congress rule we have covered. Now the negative aspects. Next main point, write down. The 28 months of Congress rule, 28 months of Congress rule suffered from some serious limitations despite its achievements. Full stop. It exposed the presence of serious weaknesses within the Congress. क्या? Number 1, factionalism. Write down point number 1. There was a great deal of factional strife on both ideological and personal grounds. Full stop. Subpoint. There was constant tension between the right and left wing leaders. Full stop. Next subpoint. Due to rising friction, comma, some leaders even resigned from their ministerial positions, including N.B. Khare, who resigned as Premier of CP. Similarly, the labor ministers of Bombay and Madras also resigned in opposition to the Trade Disputes Act. Number 2, the emergence of opportunist leaders. Sorry. Now, see, the Congress was not a closed party, rather it was an open platform and anybody could become its member. Now, the Congress also wanted to create a national government in each of the provinces where it was forming government. Therefore, it invited others who had won in their respective constituencies to join the Congress. Now, these people did not sympathize with the Congress agenda, but they had been allured, they had been attracted by the promise of ministerial office and the power that would accompany it. So they had given their support to the Congress without believing in its fundamental programs. And these were like fair weather friends. So till the time that Congress would remain in power, they would continue to support the Congress while working to enhance their own power, their own property, and even indulging in corrupt activities. If the Congress ministry is cracked down upon them, they would come out in opposition of the Congress. They would align themselves with the political opposition, with the British or the Muslim League. And if the Congress resigned, then they are going to leave the Congress to remain in government, right? So आया राम गया राम टाइप के लोग अब इसमें इमर्ज हो जाएंगे, and this is going to dilute the progressive and reformist credentials of the Congress ministries as well. Write down. Number 2, emergence of political opportunists. Write down. Since the Congress was an open platform, since the Congress was an open platform, comma, political opportunists were drawn to it, due to the allure of ministerial power, due to the allure of ministerial power. Full stop. Next sub point. However, they did not firmly believe in the Congress's agenda, and diluted the progressive and reformist credentials of the Congress ministries, and diluted the progressive and reformist credentials of the Congress ministries from within. ठीक है. Number 3, misuse of governmental power. Write down. Some right-wing dominated Congress ministries resorted to the use of colonial laws and colonial police to suppress their political opponents. Full stop. In this regard, the Bombay and Madras governments were the biggest culprits. Full stop. Sub point. Not only Did this erode the trust? Did this erode the trust of the ordinary people? Of the ordinary people, comma. It also widened the emerging political divide. The emerging political divide between the right and the left. Between the right and the left. Fourth लिखो. The policy of class adjustment. Sorry, the strategy of class adjustment failed to fully satisfy either class. Failed to fully satisfy either class. Stop. The zamindars and capitalists became apprehensive of the peasant and workers program. Full stop. This forced the Congress to dilute these programs, these programs, thus alienating the workers. Full stop. In the end, the 28 months of Congress rule, ended up alienating a section of both classes. ठीक है? A section of both classes. Lastly लिखो. The failure of the Congress ministries to fulfill the peasant and workers' demands fully broke the alliance between the Congress and the organized workers and peasant movements. Example, the All India Kisan Sabha led by Swami Sahajanand Saraswati did not participate in the Quit India movement. Did not participate in the Quit India movement and remained loyal along with the Communist Party of India and remained loyal along with the Communist Party of India. Okay? So the Congress also lost the support of the organized workers and peasant movements to a large measure by the end of its 28-month rule. Okay? So these were the negative aspects. And finally, the end of Congress rule. Now, the different Congress ministries in all the 8 provinces resigned en masse on the 22nd of October 1939. Right? Now, why was this? This was because on the 3rd of September 1939, the Governor General, Lord Linlithgow, had declared war on behalf of India against Germany. Right? So as soon as war broke out in Europe, Linlithgow, on behalf of the whole of India, declared war against Germany. And this had been done in a unilateral manner. The Congress objected to this because of the unilateral manner in which war had been declared. The Governor General had declared war unilaterally without consulting Indians. Right? And this was not acceptable to the Congress. Now, a meeting of the Congress Working Committee took place and the issue was discussed over. Now, there was one group which said that the Congress should launch a program of mass civil disobedience immediately. Now, this, of course, would be the socialists. Led by Subhash Chandra Bose. Wanted a mass movement. They felt that since British rule was under intense pressure from foreign adversaries, therefore, this was the best opportunity to finally take independence to a mass movement. On the other hand, Gandhians, they did not want to take any immediate action. Rather, they wanted a negotiated settlement within which their strategy was to offer Indian support in return for guarantees of self-determination, guarantees of Poon Swaraj, the transfer of power to an interim government formed immediately, right? So this is what the Gandhians wanted. On the other hand, there were some conservatives or constitutionalists or right-wing leaders such as C. Rajgopalachari, such as K. M. Munshi, such as uh, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, etc., who wanted the Congress to support the British unconditionally. They did not want the Congress to resign from the ministries, since this would have embarrassed the British rule, right? Now, at this point of time, launching a mass movement was not possible, right? So this strategy had to be rejected, but it caused deep friction within the Congress, right? The socialists formed an almost separate group within the Congress under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose. Although Jawaharlal Nehru was also a socialist, he decided to respect the wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi and also joined the Gandhians. The conservatives who wanted the Congress to support British rule found themselves in a very small minority, and the Gandhians argued that morally the Congress cannot support a war which is ostensibly being fought to defend democracy and freedom, while in India the same democracy and freedom is denied by the dual autocracy of British rule in India, right? So that is why it was decided that the Congress ministries are going to resign simultaneously on the 22nd of August 1939, right? And they did so. Following this, on the 22nd of December 1939, the Muslim League, after a resolution adopted to do so on the 3rd of December 1939, decided to celebrate the Day of Deliverance. This was in celebration of their so-called deliverance from Congress rule. This was a celebration of caste Hindu Congress rule. The resignation of the Congress ministries also allowed the Muslim League, along with its coalition partners, to form governments in Assam and NWFP. Right? Now, while the Congress had decided to resign from the governments on the issue of war participation and the unilateral decision making without consulting Indians, there were some other factors also involved. Firstly, there was growing opposition within the Congress on the issue of office acceptance. Right? 1937, 38 and 39 had witnessed a major upswing in the socialist activity. And since socialists were becoming stronger, so was their agenda. And it was the socialists who had led the charge along with the Gandhians against the decision to accept office. So, as the socialists became more powerful, the Congress became increasingly opposed to the continuation of office acceptance. The socialist leaders considered it to be a form of collaboration. Secondly, the running of the Congress ministries had also become problematic. Right? How? It was resulting in internal divisions that were weakening the Congress from within, and also destroying national unity. The Congress ministries, because of their various compulsions, were forced to take certain unpopular decisions. For example, the watering down of the trade disputes and tenancy laws. And this was resulting in a loss of popularity as the grim reality of Congress rule and its inability to fulfill the demands of the workers and peasants, its inability to, let us say, build upon the early enthusiasm of the workers and peasants who had sent them into power, that became apparent. They started losing ground in the matter of popular support, right? And therefore, the continuation of ministerial power was seen more to be a hurdle rather than a was seen more to be a curse rather than a boon. And thus, opinion within the leadership was that the Congress should resign rather than be completely co-opted by the government, lose power and destroy nationalism. And lastly, was the issue of rising corruption and misuse of ministerial authority. Both Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Nehru felt that many Congress leaders had been blinded by the allure of ministerial power, that corruption was rampant, and that the leaders had been diverted from the real goals of the movement. Ministerial authority was considered to be a means to an end. That is why the Congress had decided to accept office. But some leaders had started treating it as the end in itself. And thus, the leadership was also looking for a way in which it could resign from office while in a graceful manner. So they wanted a graceful exit. And the issue of war declaration provided them with this context, right? So as soon as Lilithgow declared war on behalf of India and of India against Germany, the Congress decided to withdraw or resign from from its ministries en masse. And on the 22nd of October 1939, 8 Congress ministries resigned. Okay? So this is how Congress rule came to an end. I hope this is clear. Right? तो इसको मैं लिखवा नहीं रहा हूं. I think all the important points we have already covered, right? And with this, I'm going to end today's lecture. If there are any doubts, please let me know. कोई doubts हैं? No doubts? चलिए then. Thank you for your time. I'll see you in tomorrow's class.